Joining me from New York, Bill Bradley. He served 3 terms as Democratic U.S. Senator from New Jersey. He was a candidate for the presidential nomination in 2000. He's a best-selling author, an NBA champion. He's in the Basketball Hall of Fame, collegiate and pro, and he can be heard on Sirius XM's American Voices, airing Saturdays and Sundays. I was very proud to be one of those voices. Thanks for joining us, Bill.
Thank you, Larry. Always good to be with you.
Always good to have you. Reaction to, first off, to the Iran nuclear deal. Obama says it's a landmark opportunity to move in a new direction. Critics call it dangerous. How does Bill Bradley see it?
I think we're better off with it than we would be without it. There are some risks, but there are much greater opportunities.
Why so harsh? Why is Netanyahu against it before it's even they've finished reading it?
I've got no idea. I mean, President Obama sees our interests clearly and acts upon our interests, and I can't explain Netanyahu. I've given up trying to explain him a couple of years ago.
Not all Democrats are on board. Senator Bob Menendez from your home state, his displeasure with the deal, he says it goes too far. He says we're basically legitimizing Iran as a threshold nuclear state.
Well, the real question to me is, are we better off with it than without it? And quite frankly, I'd rather have the ability to verify it, and as long as we have our allies on board of reimposition of sanctions in the event that they don't follow through on what they promised, I think that it's a big win for the United States. But there are risks, but I don't think those risks overwhelm the opportunities.
How will it affect relationships which are tenuous at best now between the United States and Israel?
I don't think anything can get between the relationship between the United States and Israel. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu has followed his own course, and that course has, in some ways, driven Israel further away from the United States. But I don't think the relationship between Israel and the United States is in danger at all. I think that it gets stronger every year.
Back in 1995, when you announced you were not going to run for a 4th Senate term, you called the American political system broken. And you said in August of '95, neither political party speaks to the people where they live in their lives. Both have moved away from my own concept of service and my own idea of what America can be. All right, it's 20 years later. That's still the same thinking.
Well, I think it's gotten worse, Larry.
Worse.
I don't think it's gotten better. I think it's gotten worse because money plays an even bigger role in our politics today than it did then. At that time, you had the law, the Supreme Court decision, Buckley-Valeo, that said that a candidate can spend as much money as he chooses or she chooses on his own campaign because money is speech. You cannot limit speech, and money is speech, so you cannot limit money. That produced a situation where, for example, when I ran in 1978, my first campaign, I spent $1.6 million on both primary and general election. In the year 2000, and that's a long time ago, John Corzine, who ran for the same seat, spent $63 million. If you put that in a context of the Citizens United decision in 2010, we now have opened the floodgates to corporations and billionaires on the grounds that a corporation is really an individual under the law, and since you can't limit an individual's right to free speech, you can't limit a corporation's right to free speech, which is, of course, spending money in politics. I think this year it's going to be obscene. It's going to be $6 to $7 billion. The little guy in America doesn't have a chance against the dominance of these special interests. And the only thing that will stop it is a constitutional amendment that overturns the Supreme Court decisions that have created this for sale sign on the U.S. government.
Critics say that was the worst Supreme Court decision since Dred Scott.
Well, I certainly think that it was, in terms of the health of our democracy, it's totally destructive. And it allows basically it says, as I mentioned, that you can spend as much money as you want in politics. And then the Congress, of course, in the anti-terrorism bill, put a little amendment in that raised what an individual can contribute to the party to $842,000. So you have the combination of that action plus the Supreme Court decision, plus the emergence of billionaires who want to shaped the whole politics of America and corporations who now are not limited. And you have that big for sale sign on the U.S. government.
Let's look at 2016, Bill. Your assessment of Hillary Clinton's push. Is she the inevitable nominee?
I think the nomination is Hillary's, barring something we don't know right now, related to health or something else we don't know. But I think she's going to be the nominee.
What do you make of the surge of Bernie Sanders?
I think it speaks to the thirst on the part of the Democratic constituency for someone to stand up and talk in a very direct way about the lives of people in this country that have been hard hit by economic circumstances over the last 10 to 15 years. I think people resonate with a very clear point of view. Politics tends to be, on the one hand this, on the other hand that, or some focus group phrase. He clearly knows what he believes. He's like Paul Wellstone, the late Paul Wellstone. You stand up and say what you believe, and you find you get contact and you get in touch with people.
Glad you mentioned him. What a wonderful man he was.
He sure was.
If Joe Biden announced, would you support him?
Joe Biden is an old dear friend. There's no chance that's going to happen. Hillary Clinton is going to be the nominee of the party. I mean, in the event that Hillary chose not to run, I think Joe Biden would be the person who the party turned to.
Okay, new polls show Donald Trump is actually leading the GOP field. What do you make of that?
Well, what can I say? You know, entertainment is everywhere. I remember when he ran in 2012, he was at a Washington Correspondents' Dinner, and one of the comedians said in this joking period, he'd hit the president, the speaker, the majority leader, and then he came to the candidates, one of whom was Donald Trump, and he said, okay, everybody out there, I want you to guard the food on your plate because that fox on Donald Trump's head might eat it. And, I mean, you know, he's going to be fodder for a lot of entertainment over the next couple of months. That's for sure.
You don't expect him to be the nominee of the Republican Party?
As a Democrat, I would pray for him to be the nominee of the Republican Party, but I don't think there's a chance. There are too many serious people running on the Republican side.
You represented New Jersey in the Senate. How do you evaluate its Governor Christie?
I think Governor Christie is a very strong candidate. He's underrated at this time. He's got great ability on his feet. I think he'll do well in the debates. The real question, will he be able to get money? And will he be able to strike the chord of people out there who are struggling to make ends meet? And I think he stands a chance. He's clearly going to be in the debate, and we'll see what happens on August 6th and in the debates thereafter. Jeb Bush is an old friend. I think he's a very, very strong candidate. I think the candidate on the Republican side that has explosive potential is Marco Rubio. He represents, or he is basically everything that Hillary is not. And I think that the one who's the smartest and the most calculating is Ted Cruz.
The smartest?
Yeah, without question. He was #1 at Harvard Law School. He's an extremely bright man. He knows exactly what he's doing, which is playing to the far right of the Republican Party for primary time.
If, as a Democrat, who would you, for want of a better word, fear the most?
As a Democrat, it's very difficult to see because I haven't seen him in action. Part of what the next 6 months is going to be is to separate the real presidential candidates from the people who are celebrities or who have dreams of illusions of being president but have no substance. So I think that it's too early to say. On a, so biographical grounds, I mean, I think Rubio would be new and fresh. I think Jeb is someone that, you know, as a Democrat, I hope he wouldn't get the nomination. As an American, I think it would be a good idea if he did.
Well, you think a Bush-Clinton race would be healthy for the country?
It depends on what they say. I have no idea what they're going to say.
You endorse
if they speak to people's true needs and hopes and dreams, it might be interesting.
You endorsed Obama. How do you feel about his presidency?
I feel good about his presidency. I think that he's someone who came in under very difficult economic circumstances. He saved the economy. We're back now into a kind of booming economy. It hasn't been equally shared, and that's a real problem, but that's a bigger problem than any president. It has to do with technological change and globalization and the demise of unions in this country. I think that he did pass a landmark health care bill. Inflation is lower, costs are down, quality's up. I think he can be proud of that. I think that he's someone who has opened up to the world in a way that other presidents haven't. He's willing to listen to people. I think that he'll be regarded as a strong president. There are things, obviously, that I wish he'd done, like public financing of presidential elections. And of congressional and senatorial elections. But overall, I think he'll be viewed as a positive in the years to come.
You think the deal with Iran will go through?
Yes, I do. I think that it would be a tragedy if a deal negotiated by a president of the United States on something as central as this to the national security of the United States would be rejected. I think it would be a tragedy, along the lines of the League of Nations in 1919 when Wilson was shot down by the Senate.
You have said many times, Senator, that slavery is our original sin, race is our unresolved dilemma. Where are we going with this? Why we have a black president and we have shootings in a church? Where are we going?
Well, I think that's up to each of us to ask. I think racism is really a failure of imagination, and you have to imagine walking in the shoes of somebody of a different race. If we all did that, we'd have a lot more tolerance and we'd be much closer as a country. I think the criminal justice system has hurt this problem. For example, I think the convictions of young, 2/3 of the people in jail are in on nonviolent drug violations. To me, that's ridiculous at a time where we have incredible infrastructure needs in this country. It seems like the only thing we can build are prisons. I think that we need to have not only a dialogue, but we need to address the issue of the economy as a whole, because you find African Americans are hurt by economic downturns even more than white Americans, even though white Americans and black Americans share the fact that the wages have been flat for the last 25 years.
How did American Voices come about, Bill?
Well, it came about, it was 2004, and somebody from Sirius I was having lunch with, they said, why don't you do a show on Sirius? But, you know, we hear too many politics, this, that, you ought to tell the truth. And I said, that interests me, but I'd really rather do a show where people who listen could hear the kind of stories that I heard on the road for 40 years as a basketball player and a politician. And the executive at Sirius said, well, I always thought somebody does best when they do what they want. Fine. And so I've been doing that since 2005. I'm in my 10th year, and I've done over 400 shows, and it's a great thing for me. People say, what do I miss about politics? Well, I only miss two things. I miss not doing public policy 24 hours a day. I fill that by writing books like We Can All Do Better was the last in 2012. And I miss the people. And I fill that by doing American Voices, and I interview people all over the country about their lives. It's not a political show.
No.
It's a show where I interview people about an unusual job, a guy that washes windows in New York City skyscrapers, a groundskeeper at Fenway Park, a public health nurse in the Aleutian Islands. And then there are interviews of another type, and that first type is primarily interviews about the dignity of work. And the other interview type is about people who are doing something selfless in their community, like the guy that shined shoes for the Pittsburgh Children's Hospital for 46 years, and out of every tip, he put a portion of that tip into a fund to pay for poor kids' health care. And the day that I interviewed him, he put over $100,000 into that fund. These kind of interviews illustrate what I used to call the goodness of the American people when I was running for president. So it's a lot of fun.
Your interview with me was all about my favorite American city, why I love that city, things I do in that city, what are my favorite foods in that city. It was enchanting almost. I never got to talk about a thing like that. I chose San Francisco, and it was wonderful.
Right. Well, we have a favorite place and favorite sound in America segment, and you were on the favorite place segment. And it gives people a chance to share who they really are and what they care about. And there you are. You're all in San Francisco.
And my favorite sound was the sound of a train.
That's
I love
right.
the sounds of train and trains' whistles going by. I like the sound of subways. Do you ever ride the subway, Dollarville?
I do. Yeah, I do.
Oh, come on. You ride the subway?
I do ride the subway. Yeah. I find it's by far in New York City, if you are in a certain time of year where the traffic is a total disaster, it's by far the easiest way to get from one place to another if you're going further than 20 blocks.
You miss politics?
I miss it, well, a couple of times, yeah. I'd like to have my voice heard in certain debates, no question about that. But as I say, I fill the void of politics in terms of policy and people with my radio show.
Bill, thank you so much. Great seeing you again.
Great seeing you, Larry. You look as great as usual.
Senator Bill Bradley, and he hosts American Voices on Sirius XM every Saturday and Sunday, and I'll be on one of them upcoming. Thanks so much, Bill.